there then started a business in the real estate business. I said, Sam, now let's get into something worthwhile. Let's look for some real good property. And we bought some lots in a place called Franscona, which is about 7 miles from Winnipeg. And these lots were selling, business lots were selling for $1,000 a lot, some $750. Building lots were selling for $250. And we bought quite a few. And we started taking people out showing this property. And lo and behold, Mr. Birch went separately with his customers, and I went with my customers. And Mr. Birch sold 3 times as many lots as I did. And I couldn't figure out how he could do that. I found out to my sorrow why he did this. He didn't sell the lots that we had, but he sold business lots, say for $150 a lot. Lots that didn't belong to us at all, but represented.
He was crooked then.
He wasn't fair. I had no idea why he sold so many more lots than I did. He sold the business lots for $150 or $200. And lo and behold, the first thing I know, we were sued for misrepresentation. And that's when I found out what he did. We had to return all the monies on the lots he sold. And of course mine was not as much, not as many sold, and we kept ours, and then I decided to quit with Mr. Birch. I didn't want to have any further business with him. I told him, I said, Sam, you know, you're a very smart fellow. You're trying to do business here like they do in Russia. You can't do business here this way. And I think if you could only straighten yourself out mentally, you'd be a very successful man. His answer to me was, if I want somebody to give me a lecture, I will go to my rabbi instead of you. And we quit our partnership. We quit our partnership, and lo and behold, within 1 year, within a short period of time, this same Birch, who went in many other things and got himself into serious trouble to the extent that he had to leave Winnipeg in disgrace.
Dad, can I ask you, just because of the time problem, there's certain questions that I'd like you to talk about specifically. If I'll ask you the question, and if you follow my question and respond. For example, I'd like you to talk about a little about that you were doing well in business or having, but why you started the Montefiore Club and Israel's End.
Why? Because there was no other social place for us to go. So I and a few more boys who came from all parts of the world decided to form a club, and we named it the Montefiore Club.
Why did you call it the Montefiore Club?
Because the Montefiore was a great philanthropist, a great Jewish leader in the world.
Yeah.
And we named the club after his name. And we formed it, and the club is still in existence. And of course it deteriorated. In my day it was a haven for young boys who'd come in, they'd find a home more or less to meet.
Did you have visiting people come and lecture there too?
Yes. Then we'd have people come from all over the world. We had them come to lecture to us, both Gentiles and Jews. Jewish leaders like Israel Zangwill came down, the territorialist. He gave a fantastic talk to us. We had Shemaiah Levine and Sokolov, the great Jewish leaders, came to talk with us about Zionism, redeeming Palestine. And I was very, very sympathetic towards it, and with the movement. And this was the commencement. The Montefiore Club was the commencement of all Jewish things that were started after that. From then on, we formed the B'nai Brit Lodge. That's a fraternal order which is known all over the world. We got a charter and we formed that and it became a community.
And then about the orphanage you started?
And then we had a Jewish orphanage, and then an old folks home. All the Jewish institutions that were formed originated from the Montefiore Club, the members of the Montefiore Club.
Let me ask you this.
Free loan society where we lend a poor family some money. They'd buy a horse and wagon, they'd go out and peddle, or put them in business, a small little business, and so forth. All these things were possible through the functioning of originally the Montefiore Club.
Had you brought your family from New York into Winnipeg by now?
Yes, no, not by now. But I brought them in about 1910, I think it was. I brought Gussie and Minnie and Dave.
Shirley?
No, Dave and Alec.
Mm-hmm.
I brought a part of the family down about 1910, 1909 or 10, one of those years. And I had my hands full with them because, you know, they were young and they needed somebody older than I was to guide them. And they.
Who took care of them?
Pardon?
Who took care of them?
I did.
They lived with you?
I moved in. Yes, I moved in with them. I rented an apartment with Gussie and Minnie, and we kept house for. And then they wouldn't stay. They wanted to go back, so I sent them back again to New York. Sent Minnie and Dave and Alec back again. I tried my best to keep there, but they wouldn't stay. And then, of course, they were young and they needed guidance, and I just didn't have the time or the necessary knowledge how to look after a family.
How about how old were you then? Around what? About?
Oh, I was in 1910. I was.
About 22?
No. 1910. I was about 20 years old.
20 years old. Well, when did you go into the grain exchange? Was that much later?
Way after.
Much later.
Much after.
When were you managing prize fighters?
Well, that's that period.
Well, that's an interesting story.
I was interested in all forms of sports. I joined the YMCA. In fact, I was on their board and joined the Red Cross, the Board of Trade, and I was on the board there. And all the sporting events I sponsored. I had some of the greatest events, football and hockey and all those things.
Who were some of the fighters that you managed?
Well, I didn't manage any of them. I was a promoter.
Oh, I see.
I promoted some of the greatest fighters in the world. Jack Johnson, Sam Langford.
You mean they fought in
fought in Winnipeg,
oh,
the greatest fights. Abe Patel and Jack Dillon and Freddie Welsh. We had championship bouts there that were heralded all over the world. I never did it to make any money because I did it for sport's sake. And what money I did make, I gave it to the various charitable institutions.
What was your interest in prize fighting, especially?
Nothing, all the sports. It wasn't
yeah,
just prize fighting.
Well, but you told a story about going to England, and I'd like to hear you tell the Alfie story.
I became known all over the world as a fight promoter, or a promoter of sorts. And I went to England one time on one of my different cruises, which I had from time to time. And one of the great fights was taking place by the English lightweight champion. His name was Johnny Summers, Alf Summers. Alf Summers was the English champion, and there was an American by the name of Holland, Tommy Murphy. And the fight promoter at that time was a friend of mine. He knew about me, and he invited me to sit with him in the corner of the ring when this fight was taking place. Everybody came in full dress suits. The referee was sitting outside, giving instructions without touching the fighters. And here's the instructions. For instance, the manager of Alf Summers gave to his fighter. I was sitting in his corner. He says, "You know these bloody Americans." He says, "You just take your time, don't rush it." he turned around, he says, just for the first 2 rounds or so, avoid him. Avoid him. Out, just avoid him. You know, the Americans, you know, they come in like a bull, just, you know, like a bullfight, and just avoid him. And the fighter was listening, he wasn't saying anything, Mr. Alf Summers. And the fight starts, and the next thing we know, my God, this poor Alf Summers, he's just being beaten all around the ring, something terrible. And he comes back in the corner, and his manager says to him again, he says, "Oh, I say, Alf, he says, I've told you to avoid him. You avoid him. What is the matter with you? I'm instructing you what to do here. Now here, remember the next round, you avoid him. Just clinch with him and avoid him. You know? Next round, this poor guy comes back again, and he's in a terrible mess. He's all bleeding all the nose and so forth. This Harlem Tommy Murphy. The third round comes in, and is wrong, and the fight again starts, and the same thing happens all over. And by that time, his manager says to him, "Alf," he says, "I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. I can't train anymore." He says, "I told you to avoid him." But the fighter, Summers, turns around and says to him, he says, "Avoid him, avoid him, avoid him. I'd have to leave the bloody British Isles to avoid him." See? So I told that story to, what's the name?
Damon Runyon.
Damon Runyon, when I got back to London from New York. On that boat, and I came back and told my experiences and some of the sporting events that I saw. And he printed this particular incident I told him about Alf Summers and Tommy Murphy. So now, what
Well, I'll
else?
tell you another story that's one of my favorites, is about the deal you made with Jay Castler when you started the Japanese importing business.
Oh, well, that's the way after.
Yeah, but it's a good story. You can tell it.
Wait a minute. Now, let's carry on from here.
All right.
Well, let me ask you one question. If I remember the Edson story is correct, you finally went back through Edson, Alberta again many years later, just to wrap up that
that's
one.
also later.
No, but just to tie it in, you just talked about that. What happened when you went back?
Well, about Edson, I got the surprise of my life. 40 years after I came back on one of my trips to England, and I passed through to see my daughter in Vancouver.
Edith.
Edith, yes. And I had a terrible cold, and I lied there in this cold on this train, and I was in a stateroom, and I didn't leave it for days. No, I suppose for the time it takes, I got to Vancouver, it used to take about 3 days. Anyway, we stopped at some place or other, and I said to my wife, where are we? She says, I know, there's some little place called Edson, Alberta, that's where we are. I said, what, Edson, Alberta? My God, I never saw Edson. And I says, I've got to get up, cold or no cold, I've got to go and see this thing here. And I ran, got off and got dressed and ran off, and there, my God, there is the city of Edson, Alberta. I said, all the things that I said in my picture are put in and it came to pass. It was considered the gateway to the peace of the country, the factories there, the railways coming in, just as I painted them. They're all there with the smokestacks, and it's the most amazing thing. I never got such a thrill in my life. I sold these lots for $100 a lot, and of course they became very valuable. And that was my first venture in real estate, which was in 1908. And this is 40 years after. But I got in very deeply in real estate after, wherein I got options on land from the Hudson Bay Company and the Catholic Mission property. I got options for hundreds of thousands of acres to bring settlers into the United States from all these European countries. I bought the land at least on option for $5 an acre. This was raw land. And millions and millions of acres lying idle, nobody bothered with it, and I conceived the idea to bring these people in, European people that are hungry for a piece of land. And I appointed agents all through Europe, and made arrangements with the CPR Railway, Canadian Ordnance. They would bring over these settlers completely from any part of Europe and get them settled where this land was for $50.